Okay, it's 12:04, so we'll make a start. So, hello everyone, and welcome to the our webinar, Turning Social Value from a Policy into Your Competitive Advantage. And we really want this webinar to be a practical session, and the intention is and we hope it's really beneficial, particularly for those in the built environment, developers, contractors, consultants, and we're really just wanting to equip you to be able to leverage your competitive advantage um, through social value. So I'm just going to explain a little bit about myself and the team. So my name is Jodie Bispham. I'm the founder and chief sustainability and social impact consultant at Enable Green. I'm also joined by my colleagues, Joy Mumbi, who is our sustainability and communications consultant. So Joy has an extensive background in communications and PR and supports clients in their social value communications and delivery. And we also have Nadine Ivanov, and she will be speaking during the webinar today. And Nadine is our research and policy associate, and she really supports in providing that context around policy in relation to social value and sustainability. So, our agenda today, I won't go through each of the points, but we have roughly 55 minutes left of the session. And just to say thank you so much for giving up your lunch to join the session. It's great to have you. So, we'll start off by looking at social value, where it's come from, where it's heading to, and how you can make social value your competitive advantage. We'll look at pitfalls as well as practical steps that you can take for your organization within the next 3 months to really maximize and leverage social value for success. And towards the end of the session, we'll also have a question and answer, just a bit of housekeeping as well. This session is being recorded, and you're welcome to drop your questions into the chat. And towards the end of the webinar, we will look at the questions, or you can unmute and share the questions that you have. Okay, and we're really hoping that towards the end of the webinar, you'll leave with a clear insight into how social value decisions are being made and practical steps on how you can really begin to implement and create a more compelling narrative around social value to win work and bids, etc. Okay, so a good place for us to start is understanding what social value is. I think we have people joining from different sectors, different understandings of what social value is. And I've got two definitions on the screen here. So we have one from the Institute of Human Rights and Business, and it shares how social value essentially is or represents the net positive impacts that an action can create for a society. And it looks at here the definition kind of notes that it's looking at the benefits purely beyond the financial returns, but it's looking at the economic, the social benefits to communities, to people, and also to the environment. I've also shared a definition from Better Building Partnerships, and as a built environment sustainability consultancy that we are at Enable Green, we really like this particular definition where it says social value is created when buildings, places, and infrastructure support environmental, economic, and social well-being. And I think the built environment is such a powerful vehicle into really creating social impact and social value because oftentimes these buildings and places are where people congregate and come together. And so the built environment provides a really powerful medium to really creating impact and making a positive difference in the lives of people. So I'm going to move on now. And I'm going to invite my colleague, Nadine, to just share a little bit more about the policy backdrop that is driving the social value conversation. So, Nadine,
Jody, can you hear me? All
yes,
good?
I can hear you.
Okay. Yeah, so the policy landscape of social value has shifted quite significantly in the last decade or so, with an emphasis on moving from being a voluntary construct to more of a mandatory one now. And it was first introduced in the policy landscape through the Social Value Act of 2012, acting as sort of the foundation of this work. And this signaled that public bodies should consider social, economic, and environmental benefits when commissioning services. And it was an important first step, but again, largely voluntary. And councils and commissioners were encouraged to think about social outcomes, but not mandated to necessarily score them yet. And that changed after 2020, where the pandemic exposed and exacerbated many inequalities, and the government responded with stronger procurement guidance, notably in the PPN guidance that was enacted in 2020. And that required contracting authorities to include social values in commissioning decisions and to be more explicit about the weighting. And social value then kind of moved from more of an optional consideration to something that had been designed into tenders. And most recently, the Procurement Act of 2023 has further embedded social value into this legal framework, where once might have been just a checkbox per se, it's increasingly a more mandatory part of evaluation and appears in recruitment and tender scoring, and in some cases can be a more decisive factor in award decisions today. So, in short, the policy trajectory is quite clear, where it's kind of moved from voluntary consideration to being a mandatory requirement to being scored and now potentially decisive. And the shift is driven by post-pandemic priorities and rising inequality, in hand with shifting regulations and social priorities and climate targets. And this creates an opportunity for organizations, developers, contractors, consultants that can measure evidence and articulate social value gain as a clear competitive advantage in procurement, which can also reward in result in award-winning social value propositions. Um, I think the next slide, Jody. Yeah. So then social value in today's policy landscape isn't judged by one person per se, or one entity, or one bid evaluator. And in practice, it's a lot more complex than that, which is why it's really important to know who you're engaging for and writing for. And social value isn't longer judged solely by procurement officers. A modern evaluation panel often includes commercial or procurement teams, policy experts, and the end users or the local community as well. And these panels are often looking past broad objective statements and instead value evidence-based, contract-specific, and measurable commitments, which is what Jody will be touching on in a bit. And then the client, either ESG or sustainability lead, will set the framework and shape the weighting of factors. And this is where submissions really should demonstrate innovation, equality of opportunity, and commitment to long-term societal improvements, showing alignment within the organization's kind of social value strategy in a broader scope. And the role of planning authorities will be to directly involve the local community by requiring maybe a community benefit agreement or requiring certain social value commitments to be a condition of consent going forward. And finally, maybe most importantly of all, are the local stakeholders themselves who won't necessarily be scoring your bid, but they are the ones that are first and foremost impacted, and therefore they will shape your reputation, your relationships, and the longevity of your work in the future. And yeah, these mixed audiences and standards just highlight why delivery and framing of social value strategy is so important today. And I think Jody now will speak more on how you can use your social value strategy as an advantage.
Thank you, Nadine. Thank you. So, yes, so just to give you an idea of the scale of opportunity here as to why social value is a competitive advantage and how you can leverage it. I've got some figures on the screen here. So the first one being 385 billion, and this figure represents the the public contracts awarded in England, according to the ONS, Office of National Statistics, and we see that there's billions and billions that of public contracts available to businesses, and a key requirement of social value is around 10% or 10 to 20% of public contracts over £100,000 need to be spent on social value. So this is a really significant figure for those who might still be on the fence about social value, what the opportunities are. That's a really interesting and quite an important figure there. We have the second one, which is 10 to 20%, and this is the amount that local authorities allocate towards social value in terms of how much they put on the weighting of social value. So when they're looking through tenders and bids, they put a 10 to 20% weighting on how well a company has demonstrated their social value proposition. So this is quite significant. And the final number that we see here is 2 times. And according to the social value portal, they highlighted that companies and organizations that have demonstrated their delivery and evidence that of social value are twice as likely to win repeat work when it comes to social value. So it's no longer just a compliance exercise. There is definitely significant gains that can be made and opportunities from leveraging social value and taking it seriously. So just kind of adding on to what Nadine's already shared with us, we can see that there's a clear direction of travel when it comes to the social value policy and where it's come from and where it's going. We see the Social Value Act in 2012, where local authorities simply just had to consider the social value of their procurement and tenders. We see growing adoption in 2018. In 2020, as Nadine's highlighted, we saw the PPN 0620, where requiring at least 10% of government contracts needed to have a weighting towards social value. And we see the social value model developed from there. And then fast forward to 2023, the Procurement Act, which highlights or encourages greater transparency and accountability through greater reporting on social value. So we see this clear direction of travel, as Nadine's already touched on, and now it's quite a decisive factor, and it's not going to reverse. It's going to continue along this route. And now I really want to touch on where built environment organizations often lose their advantage when it comes to social value, when it comes to bidding. And there's 6 pointers that I want to touch on. And the first is treating social value as simply a tick box exercise or a compliance exercise. And sometimes when you hear social value being mentioned, some people in your organization might sigh, might roll their eyes, and sometimes that can come across and that can come across through quite vague commitments, such as we'll support local employment, and there's no sort of examples or figures given around that. So that's the first pitfall. There's no targets and outcomes. It's quite generic and not much thought is added onto it. The second pitfall is where social value is treated as a later stage bolt-on. So oftentimes, organizations and businesses might be so focused on simply trying to show how they'll meet a deliverable that they'll just consider social value at the last minute, with no sort of connection into how they integrate social value into their project delivery. And that's quite clear to evaluators when social value is just kind of added on as a more as an afterthought. Um, and I'll kind of get into that a little bit later in terms of why that can be evident when it's perceived as just something added on at the end and how we can best embed and integrate it. The third pitfall is having no measurement or evidence surrounding your social value. So similar to the first, with it being quite vague, there's no demonstration of how an organization might have leveraged social value in the past. There's no sort of credibility there. And this is important, even if you're starting out and you're quite new to your organization's quite new to delivering social value, it's important to still provide measures, at least or projections on how you believe how much the how much value you're going to be adding on to that social return on investment. And a little bit later in the presentation, we'll get onto those measures and numbers that you can use to project when you're writing social value bids or your social value strategy. And so the fourth one is being too generic. And by its very nature, social value is local. It's about impacting communities and people and the environment around, particularly for organizations in the built environment. And so sometimes some organizations might trip up where they are too generic and it's almost like they're copying and pasting their social value commitments from one bid or from one another organization and using it as their own. So it's really important that when writing and thinking about social value, you're really specifying and highlighting how it is going to impact that particular community, region, or place. Now, the fifth one is undervaluing social value within an organization and team. And oftentimes, social value might be perceived as something that the bid team do or the ESG team do, and that can be quite evident. It's really important to ensure that teams across the business really understand where your organization sits in terms of the social value and that they understand the role that they play towards its operation and social value delivery, even if it's quite small. Um, Yes, and then the final pitfall is missing the narrative. The thing that I really value about social value is that you're really able to make an impact to people, to the environment, and to place, and that in particular people. And sometimes organizations fail to tell a compelling story or narrative about how their work is going to positively impact people. And they sometimes fail to connect that to whether it's the local authorities, wider objectives and policies of their clients. They kind of miss that key of humanizing it and making it really highlighting how it will benefit or improve the lives of those around and to the community surrounding. So it's quite costly, as we saw in the previous slide, of getting it wrong. And we'll move on to, I'll show you an example of a bid, of two bids, and then we'll move on to how you can really come away from these pitfalls and really leverage social value for your competitive advantage. So on the screen here, we have two examples of two bids, and we can call it a tale of two bids. So on the left-hand side, we have bid A, and it's got quite a few, it's falling into a few of those pitfalls that we've just spoken about. I'll read it out. So it says, we are committed to social value and will support local employment, engage with local supply chains, and promote health and well-being throughout the project. So it sounds good on the surface, but what it's kind of missing is that substance. So there are no specific commitments to how they'll promote social value, how they'll support local employment, or how they'll engage with local supply chains. Additionally, there's no measurement framework if they're going to apply TOMS, how they're going to measure this. There's no sort of like accountability link to it. And there's no sort of evidence of past delivery or even projections of the social return on investment or the impact it's going to make. So it's quite vague. And so bid teams or whoever's engaging and reading this sentence or this strategy might feel like it's a little bit flimsy. So in terms of scores, it would score it's quite lowly on that scale. And conversely, we have bid B, which we can see is quite competitive. And I'll read that out. So we commit to sourcing 40% of subcontractors within a 10-mile radius, creating free apprenticeships aligned to local college pathways, and reporting against Tom's quarterly, building our track record of 2.1 million social value delivered on a comparable scheme in 2023. So we see with bid B, it's really specific in terms of the percentage of subcontractors that they're going to be using. It's They're highlighting that it's local, so they're using subcontractors within a 10-mile radius. They're not kind of using someone that's you know, it, in a really distant location. They are also providing apprenticeship opportunities and also building upon existing frameworks because they're collaborating and partnering with a local college and their pathway. And they've demonstrated how they're going to stay accountable, that they're going to use the TOMS framework and they're going to be reporting on that quarterly. And they're also showing that what they've done before, so building that credibility there as well. So it's not necessarily down to budget or the size of the team necessarily, but it's really about breaking down the project steps and seeing where social value can be embedded and added in. So now that we've seen these two bid examples or two statement examples, we can now speak about what a competitive social value approach is. And so there's three dimensions that I'm going to share on this. The first being strategic and specific. So it's really important that before even embarking on a social value strategy or even in bid writing, that you really understand the social value priorities of that particular local authority, of that client, and being clear on what their social value priorities are. It's additionally important to ensure that the commitments are tied to real project outputs. So, in the case of a construction or a development taking place, really breaking down that process and understanding opportunities for apprenticeships, where you can partner with, as in the last bid, partnering with local schools and colleges to provide work experience, seeing the subcontractors that you can partner with that are based more locally. And also linked to this is identifying community needs before writing any sort of bid and social value. And so this is that community mapping of understanding what the challenges that are in a specific location, a specific area and borough, whether that's higher unemployment, um, whether that is if there's a focus from that local authority to be or to reduce their CO2 emissions, making sure that you're really understanding the needs there and also, and we'll get into this a bit later, partnering with charities and understanding what some of those needs are, what they're doing, and how you can also partner with them. Um, and that's all about being strategic and specific. So it's not general, it's not kind of broad brush. It's really specific to the needs of that region or community. And then the second dimension is evidencing and being credible. So if you are if you've done social value work in the past, showing what you've done previously that's worked well and showing that with data, um, using frameworks like Tom's, and we'll get onto that a bit later, because I know I realize I've mentioned that a few times. I'll explain what that is a bit later, but using evaluation frameworks to show that that you're reporting and taking account of the social value and what you've done, and using case studies to demonstrate in the past how you've used and created local impact. And even if you haven't, even if you're kind of starting off on this journey, and we'll get to that a bit later as well, mapping out things that you can speak about to demonstrate case studies of what's worked well in the past. So really evidencing and positioning yourself as a credible potential supplier or a credible partner. And the third one is embedding and differentiating. So social value needs to be built into project plans, not just having it as a bolt-on at the end. So it's really understanding what that project scope looks like, and again, how social value can be weaved in into that. And it's really important that teams across the business, across your organization, really understand and take ownership of their operations and how that can be delivered. And again, finally, that sort of narrative in your social value approach and whether that's your strategy or your bid, highlighting what that narrative is and how that links directly to community impact and community outcomes. Okay, so I hope that is making kind of breaking down what a competitive social value approach looks like. I'll move on to the next slide. And it's just talking about here the measure how we go about measuring social value, different frameworks that you can adopt. So we have the TOMS framework, and TOMS stands for themes, outcomes, and measures, and it's the most widely used framework, often across local government, housing, um, and yeah, it gets you to identify the themes, identify the outcomes, and then the measures. We also have the PPN 0620, and this is linked back to, this was introduced in 2020, as we noted before, and it highlights a specific social value model surrounding five themes and and that's linked to eight policy outcomes. We have the HACT Social Value Bank, and this offers a more like for like comparison across bids for evaluators, and it assigns financial proxies to different social outcomes, demonstrating the social return on investment. And while I've highlighted those three, oftentimes there are bespoke frameworks that are used across the social value landscape. So it's really important if you are writing any sort of bid or strategy that you look to see what that specific local authority is using, because some local authorities have developed their own. So it's always important to check before writing or check which evaluation framework best suits what you're doing and what you're trying to demonstrate. Okay, so I just want to also just break down the project life cycle when there's a specific project that's taking place, how social value can be considered, and the different stages and steps that occur. So you might have the pre-bid or the pre-project stage. So even if you're not writing a bid, it might be before you take on or begin a project. So the first part of this is it's really important to understand that need that I was mentioning of the community. So you want to undertake a community mapping activity where you're looking and you're researching about the community, the local authority or a borough, and you're engaging with stakeholders, you're engaging with VCSEs, so that's the voluntary sector and social enterprises that are already doing work within that particular particular location. And you really want to understand the framework that you're going to undertake and but basically you're doing research to really provide that foundation of where the needs are. So that's stage one. The second stage is the bid stage or the project stage where you need to be really specific in how you can make that impact, where you can add that value, and you're based on the stakeholder meetings and interviews that you might have done, you're looking and seeing where and how your project can make that impact. So you're making commitments, seeing what is viable, and you want to make sure this particular stage is aligning to the client's framework, or your own framework. So this is really important where you're kind of building that out and making the case for that social return on investment. Stage three is the mobilization um, stage where you are really you're embedding social value into that project plan. You're making sure that contractors and those that you're working with understand how they need to operate, what sort of reporting they need to do, that you're briefing them on how this project is going to be carried out, and especially how social value is integrated and the reporting structures that need to be agreed before delivery takes place or during. And then for stages 4 and 5, you have the delivery stage where you're actively, as the project is going on, whether that's the development, um, a regeneration project, you're really tracking those commitments in real time. So if you've said that you are going to take on the 3 apprentices each year, you're tracking the number of how many hours of work they're working. So, for example, you might say we've delivered 48 hours of um, apprenticeship training, and you're really tracking those metrics to highlight how you're adding value, how you're delivering on your social value. And so, for example, for the TOMS framework, this is often through quarterly reporting. And you also want to make sure that you're still engaging the community, you're engaging with stakeholders, and you're conducting that social listening to ensure that the the work that you're doing, the social value that's being undertaken is being well received by those impacted. And then stage 5 is the completion stage where you're reporting, you're writing case studies, you're looking back at lessons learned, and you're reflecting on the wider impact. So this is just to kind of bring that project life cycle to life and to show you how social value is can be applied in this way. Okay, so now I really want to get onto the practical actions that you can take over the next 3 months towards social value. And so the first one is an undertaking an audit. And sometimes the word audit sounds a little bit daunting. It's not, it's essentially just a review or to see what you've done so far. And it's just reflecting on what you've done and how it has been impacted. So if you have in the past submitted bids over the past few months, the past year, looking back at that, if you haven't submitted bids, that's okay, but it's looking at what you currently do and identifying where you're kind of weak in social value. If in the case of a bid and bid writing, if the claims were too generic, if they weren't really related to the particular local authority that you're applying to, if you're kind of starting out and you haven't done this before, looking at where you might have applied social value. Because I think oftentimes when we work with businesses, sometimes they don't realize that they are adding social value. So, for example, you might be employing people within a certain vicinity. So that means you're supporting local economic development by employing people locally. You might be working with contractors or suppliers that that value um, sustainability and use sustainable products and materials. So that's another way. So really just looking and reflecting is the first part. The second part is looking at whether you're working for a client, but looking at their social value priorities. If it's a bid for a local authority, looking back at what's going on in the wider framework. What are those priorities in the local borough? Are you aligning with what the direction of travel that they're moving in? And you might need to look back and tailor and amend your social value priorities. And then the third one is, and if you haven't done this or if you haven't got this, that's fine, but really putting together a one pager or a social value strategy, um, and looking back at social value that you have delivered, thinking through those and noting them on a one pager or on a document about the the organizations you might have worked with, how they might have been impacted. And this can just be a really great point of reference for when you come to either demonstrate social value that you've done in the past, or just even as a reminder to yourself as an organization of what you've done and what you want to build on going forward. So these are just some practical actions that you can begin to take within the next 3 months or so. So it's about really auditing and reviewing, looking at the wider priorities, and creating that reference document for yourself that you can build up upon and further expand. Okay, so if you're still on the fence about social value, I want to also offer another angle in terms of what your competitors might be already doing. So often there has been an increase in teams and organizations having dedicated social value managers and teams that are working towards social value. It's no longer just simply the bid team or the ESG team that are working towards social value and delivering it. It's no longer just one person. They have dedicated teams towards social value that work with communities and within the organization to really push social value and to highlight that its importance. In the pre-qualification stage, and when it comes to local authorities, your competitors might be that are doing well in social value are already developing their own track record of delivering impact, delivering that social return on investment. So they're gaining that sort of advantage. And it's not this, I'm sharing this not to, yeah, just to really highlight that there's still time to kind of close the gap and to just embark on your journey of social value because those who are doing it really well, um, are advancing and there's still opportunity to build your own track record and start on that journey. And the third element is that your competitors might already be tracking social value in real time and producing impact reports. So increasingly, organizations are showing what they've done over the past few years, um, and that feeds into their evidence libraries. And this is another incentive for us to really take social value really seriously, um, and it kind of pushes us to try and build out our own evidence libraries of of what we've done and what we're planning on doing as well. So this is a little another angle to consider social value from as well. So, as I've highlighted, it's really important to review what you're doing at the moment and not to feel stuck if you're at the early stage. Um, Look at what sort of social value projects that you might consider doing in the future and undertake that gap analysis of where you are currently and where you want to get to and the steps that you can take. And myself and the team at Enable Green. We we work with businesses and organizations in the built environment at different stages of social value, whether it's the bid stage or delivery, and we support in building that out no matter what stage you find yourself in. So do get in touch with us. And I think as well, I'm going to just open up the floor to questions or comments. Um, so I hope this has provided a more practical way that you can begin to implement social value to get you thinking about where it's come from and where it's going and it's here to stay and how you can really make a difference within your community as well. So yes, I'm gonna pause now and just see if we have any questions, any comments.